The silence of Ashworth Crescent was broken only by the arrival of flashing blue lights. Police cars idled outside the Whitmore residence, their beams cutting through the drizzle like cold knives. The neighbors who had ignored the screams now watched from behind curtains, suddenly curious when it was too late. Inside, at the kitchen table, Thomas Whitmore sat with unnerving calm. His shirt sleeves were rolled neatly to the elbow, his hands folded before him as if he were waiting for tea, rather than an interrogation. A faint smear of something dark marked his cuff, but he brushed it away without a word. "It was nothing," Thomas said, his voice measured, almost soothing. "Just an argument. My wife has episodes, fits of hysteria, you could call them. She shouts, she throws things, and tonight she simply lost control." Detective Inspector Harold Fenwick scribbled in his notebook, the scratch of pen echoing in the room. Words surfaced on the page. Unstable, argument, hysteria. Thomas's gaze hovered somewhere beyond the detective's shoulder. He did not meet eyes. His fingers, though folded, tapped faintly against the wood in a rhythm that betrayed nerves he tried to suppress. "You didn't think to call for help?" Fenwick asked, voice neutral. Thomas gave a thin smile. "It wasn't necessary. Once Clara wears herself out, she quiets. She's been like this for years. Doctors couldn't find anything concrete, but you know how women can be. Emotional." The choice of words hung heavy in the air, a relic of condescension that no amount of calm could soften. Outside, another officer moved through the rooms, flashlight beam cutting across toppled furniture and shattered glass. Each corner told a different story than Thomas's polished version. "You're saying," Fenwick pressed, "that your wife's screams, the ones heard across the street, were simply a tantrum?" Thomas leaned back in his chair. The overhead bulb threw shadows across his face, hollowing his features. He adjusted his wedding ring, twisting it round his finger again and again. "I love my wife," he replied, voice flat. "But she is not well. She imagines threats that aren't there. She lashes out. Tonight was no different. For a heartbeat, the room held still. Then a crack showed. Thomas's jaw clenched, the tremor in his hand more visible now. Fenwick closed his notebook slowly. His eyes narrowed. "We'll see if the evidence agrees with you, Mr. Whitmore." Thomas's composure flickered, just for a moment, like a mask slipping under pressure, and in that fleeting instant, suspicion took root. The silence of Ashworth Crescent was broken only by the arrival of flashing blue lights. Police cars idled outside the Whitmore residence, their beams cutting through the drizzle like cold knives. The neighbors who had ignored the screams now watched from behind curtains, suddenly curious when it was too late. Inside, at the kitchen table, Thomas Whitmore sat with unnerving calm. His shirt sleeves were rolled neatly to the elbow, his hands folded before him, as if he were waiting for tea rather than an interrogation. A faint smear of something dark marked his cuff, but he brushed it away without a word. "It was nothing," Thomas said, his voice measured, almost soothing. "Just an argument. My wife has episodes. Fits of hysteria, you could call them. She shouts, she throws things, and tonight she simply lost control." Detective Inspector Harold Fenwick scribbled in his notebook, the scratch of pen echoing in the room. Words surfaced on the page. Unstable, argument, hysteria. Thomas's gaze hovered somewhere beyond the detective's shoulder. He did not meet eyes. His fingers, though folded, tapped faintly against the wood in a rhythm that betrayed nerves he tried to suppress. "You didn't think to call for help?" Fenwick asked, voice neutral. Thomas gave a thin smile. "It wasn't necessary. Once Clara wears herself out, she quiets. She's been like this for years. Doctors couldn't find anything concrete, but you know how women can be. Emotional." The choice of words hung heavy in the air, a relic of condescension that no amount of calm could soften. Outside, another officer moved through the rooms, flashlight beam cutting across toppled furniture and shattered glass. Each corner told a different story than Thomas's polished version. "You're saying," Fenwick pressed, "that your wife's screams, the ones heard across the street, were simply a tantrum?" Thomas leaned back in his chair. The overhead bulb threw shadows across his face, hollowing his features. He adjusted his wedding ring, twisting it round his finger again and again. "I love my wife," he replied, voice flat. "But she is not well. She imagines threats that aren't there. She lashes out. Tonight was no different. For a heartbeat, the room held still. Then a crack showed. Thomas's jaw clenched, the tremor in his hand more visible now. Fenwick closed his notebook slowly. His eyes narrowed. "We'll see if the evidence agrees with you. Mr. Whitmore." Thomas's composure flickered just for a moment, like a mask slipping under pressure, and in that fleeting instant, suspicion took root. Detective Fenwick left the Whitmore kitchen with his jaw tight, the echo of Thomas's calm denial still gnawing at him. But as he prepared his report the next day, a call came through. A woman insisted she had information about Clara, information that could not wait. Her name was Eleanor Briggs. She arrived at the station wrapped in a dark coat, her hair damp from the rain. There was nothing casual about her presence. She carried the tension of someone who had held too many secrets for too long. "I need you to understand," she said, her voice unsteady but fierce. Clara wasn't mad. She wasn't hysterical. She was afraid. Fenwick gestured for her to continue. The tape recorder clicked alive. Eleanor's hands trembled in her lap. "She used to tell me things. About Thomas. How he'd check her phone every night, scroll through her messages. Once she tried to laugh it off, said it was just jealousy. But it wasn't. It was surveillance." Her eyes glazed as though she were replaying the moments herself. He stopped her seeing friends. Said she was too easily influenced, even me. We'd meet in secret like children sneaking out past curfew. Eleanor's lips quivered. And the way he twisted things. If she questioned him, he'd convince her she was imagining it. That she was unstable. He made her doubt her own sanity. A flicker of memory rose, warm and almost golden. Clara standing with Eleanor at a cafe table, laughing so hard she spilled her coffee. Her eyes alive, her voice carrying brightness. Then the memory fractured, bleeding into the dim present, Eleanor alone. Her cheeks streaked with tears as she spoke. "She told me once," Eleanor whispered, "that he would make her disappear if she ever tried to leave." She said it like a joke, but her eyes didn't match her voice. They were hollow. Fenwick leaned forward. "Did she ever show you proof?" Eleanor nodded faintly. "She started keeping things. Notes, receipts, even photographs. She hid them, afraid he'd find out. I told her to come to the police, but she said, 'He'll find a way to make it my fault.'" Her voice broke. She pulled a phone from her bag, unlocking it with trembling fingers. On the screen glowed a string of unread messages, her words stacked one after another. "Are you safe? Call me, please, just tell me you're okay." Each message unanswered, each timestamp inching closer to the night of the screams. The glow of the screen lit Eleanor's face in sickly blue, her tears catching the light. "She knew this would happen," Eleanor said, her voice reduced to a whisper. "She knew." Fenwick's pen stopped mid-scribble. The notebook lay open, but his focus was elsewhere. Eleanor's testimony had cracked the tidy facade Thomas tried to build. If Clara truly left a trail, hidden somewhere inside that house, then Thomas Whitmore's calm story was about to unravel. And for the first time, the detective wondered not just what had happened that night, but how many people had ignored Clara's warnings long before the screams began. Detective Fenwick's notes were damning, but the case was growing larger than his reach. The next morning, Detective Chief Inspector Samuel Kerrigan was assigned. Kerrigan was older, sharper, the kind of man whose silence could unravel more than most men's questions. He arrived at Ashworth Crescent just as dawn broke, the street washed in pale gray light. The houses stood in a row, each a perfect clone of the other. Ordinary facades, ordinary gardens, yet every window seemed to hold a secret. Kerrigan paused in the middle of the road, staring at the Whitmore house. To him, the street felt like a gallery of mute witnesses. The door of Mrs. Latham's house creaked open. She was the first to speak. "I did hear her," she admitted, voice brittle, screaming. I thought it wasn't my business. You don't interfere with married couples, do you? They argue, they make up, and we look like fools if we meddle." Her eyes fell to the floor. I closed my curtains and prayed it would end. Her words were transcribed into Fenwick's book, underlined twice. Next was Mr. Sykes, the chain-smoking widower across the road. He leaned on his gate, eyes heavy with sleeplessness. She screamed like she was being torn apart. But I've lived long enough to know trouble when I see it. You step into a mess like that, it becomes your mess, too. I told myself, better not get involved. His voice cracked, betraying the weight of guilt. The accounts piled up, different words. The same excuse I thought someone else would call. I didn't want my children frightened. I didn't believe it was serious. Every voice built a haunting chorus of hesitation. Kerrigan listened in silence, his jaw clenched. Finally he spoke, his tone cutting through their justifications. She screamed loud enough for an entire street to hear, and yet not one of you lifted the receiver. Not one. The silence that followed was suffocating. Curtains twitched. Eyes peered from windows, but no one dared respond. Later, back at the Whitmore residence, Kerrigan stood alone at the curb. The sun had risen, but the street still felt shrouded in the shadow of the night before. He imagined Clara's silhouette at the window, palms pressed against the glass, neighbors watching but doing nothing. His notebook was already filled with facts and statements, but it wasn't evidence he was writing now. It was judgment. The neighbors all heard, and all chose silence. Kerrigan closed the book slowly. If Clara had truly been silenced by her husband, then her neighbors had helped finish the job, not with hands, but with their refusal to act. He looked once more at the Whitmore house, its curtains drawn tight, and whispered to himself, "Every secret on this street is about to come out." Detective Chief Inspector Kerrigan was not a man easily shaken, but the silence of Ashworth Crescent gnawed at him. If the neighbors had chosen blindness, then it was his duty to see everything. The search of the Whitmore house began at dawn. Officers moved carefully, their gloved hands combing through drawers and cupboards. Most of it was ordinary. Receipts, unopened posts, stacks of dull tax forms. But then beneath the bed, in a box wrapped in a faded scarf, they found something that changed the tone of the investigation. A journal. Clara's handwriting sprawled across the pages. Desperate and slanted. "He checks my phone every night. He calls me forgetful, hysterical. He says if I ever leave, he'll ruin me. If something happens to me, it's him." Kerrigan read the words aloud in the dim bedroom, the silence thick with their weight. The officers exchanged glances. The mask Thomas had worn so neatly was beginning to crack. The confrontation came 2 days later, inside a gray interrogation room. The overhead light flickered slightly, casting long shadows. A two-way mirror divided the truth from those watching. Thomas Whitmore sat opposite Kerrigan, his posture stiff, but his expression still wearing its veneer of calm. His wedding ring tapped lightly against the table, tap, 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 the rhythm betraying nerves he could not silence. Kerrigan laid the journal on the table between them. "Your wife was keeping a record," he said evenly. "She feared you. She believed you'd harm her." Thomas's lips twitched into a smirk. Clara was troubled. She liked to dramatize things. Writing nonsense gave her comfort. Kerrigan's eyes did not waver. "And what about these?" He slid forward a folder. Bank statements, late-night withdrawals, hotel invoices in Birmingham. "A double life? Money missing from joint accounts? A woman you visited 3 times in the last month?" For the first time, Thomas's composure faltered. His jaw tightened, his hand stilled. "You're twisting this," he snapped. "Those meetings were business. And Clara, she never understood money, never understood the pressure I was under." Kerrigan leaned closer, his voice a blade. "Clara understood enough to document every lie. Enough to fear you would make her disappear." Thomas's mask slipped further. His voice rose sharper now. "She was unstable. She accused me of things I never did. She wanted to destroy me. I couldn't live like that." The words hung heavy, more confession than defense. Through the glass, Detective Fenwick whispered to his colleague, "That's not the voice of a grieving husband. That's the voice of a man cornered." Inside the room, Thomas gripped his temples, muttering under his breath. The calm veneer had vanished. What remained was something brittle, dangerous. Rage pressed into human form. Kerrigan closed the journal slowly, never breaking eye contact. This wasn't an argument gone too far. This was a breaking point you planned, and Clara knew it. Thomas's silence was louder than any denial. His reflection in the glass showed 2 faces, the calm mask he had worn, and the fractured truth beneath. For Kerrigan, suspicion had shifted into certainty. This was no accident. It was murder in waiting. And the screams that night were Clara's final warning to a world that chose not to listen. The courtroom was heavy with silence, the kind that felt thick enough to choke. Journalists filled the benches, pens poised, their cameras ready to capture the fall of Thomas Whitmore, the man who had hidden his cruelty behind suburban curtains. At the front, Thomas sat stiffly, his solicitor whispering in his ear. His once polished suit now hung on him like armor dented from battle. He stared forward, avoiding every gaze, as if the walls themselves were safer to confront than the faces of those who had once called Clara neighbor. Friend, wife. One by one, the neighbors were summoned. Mrs. Latham spoke first, her hands shaking as she clutched the rail. "I heard her scream," she admitted, voice faltering. "But I thought it wasn't my place." Her eyes brimmed with tears. "If I'd called, maybe she'd still be here." Then Mr. Sykes leaning heavily on his cane. "I told myself not to get involved. But her voice, it haunts me. I still hear it when I try to sleep." His words cracked, the courtroom hanging on his guilt. Each testimony was a confession, not of action, but of inaction. Their silence that night had become its own crime. But it was Eleanor Briggs who broke the trial wide open. She took the stand with a courage that trembled in every step. Her hands gripped Clara's journal, its pages worn, her thumb marking the place where Clara had written her final plea. "She told me she was scared," Eleanor said, her voice sharp at first, then cracking. "She told me he would make her disappear. And I didn't stop him. None of us did." Her eyes fell to Thomas, who sat rigid, jaw clenched. "I read her messages every night," Eleanor continued, holding up her phone. The unread texts glowed across the screen, a damning portrait of a friendship unanswered. She reached out. "And I wasn't there when it mattered most." Her voice broke completely then, sobs echoing across the chamber. The jury turned, shifting in unease. The reality of Clara's fear was no longer words on paper, but grief made flesh. The verdict came swiftly. Guilty. Thomas did not flinch, though his mask had already fallen long before. He was led away in chains, his wedding ring still glinting faintly in the fluorescent light. Outside, the press called it justice. The neighbors told themselves they had spoken the truth at last, but Detective Kerrigan knew better. Justice had arrived too late to save Clara from the night her screams went unanswered. Weeks later, Ashworth Crescent returned to its stillness. The Whitmore house stood empty, its windows dark, its curtains shifting faintly with the autumn wind. The neighbors passed by quickly, heads lowered, unwilling to meet its hollow stare, and if you listened closely on quiet nights, some swore they could still hear it, the faint echo of Clara's voice, breaking through the silence she never escaped.